Hey everyone, welcome to Pit Stops To Podium, the RevPartners podcast, where we talk to execs who have competed and won, taking their companies from high growth to high scale. My name is Brendan Tollison. I am the co-founder and CEO of RevPartners, and I'm delighted to have with me today Kevin Lee for this episode of Pit Stops To Podium. Welcome, Kevin.
Thanks, Brendan. A pleasure to join you.
Likewise, based off of your background, and I guess for those that are listening by audio, it looks like you're joining us from New York. Is that a fair assumption?
Yes, indeed. I'm up in my Scarsdale home office, but got the green screen behind me, so have green screen will travel.
Always be marketing. I do like the background. I'm excited about this episode. We'll get into the big idea in just a second, but before we do that, I want to introduce Kevin to our audience. Kevin co-founded Didit, a leading digital-first marketing firm, in 1996. He also founded givingforward.org, which is a cause marketing nonprofit with a focus on generating revenues for other nonprofits, which is really cool. So what you're hearing is Kevin can do both for-profit and nonprofit, but really with a passion for how to help companies grow, whether it's in the for-profit or nonprofit space. Previously to Giving Forward, Kevin co-founded We Care, which I'll let you speak to that because I think that's a really cool fun fact. So I'm not going to divulge what you've done with that, but I think our audience will really love that. But TLDR, Kevin is a marketing expert. He's written multiple books, multiple pieces on this topic, and serves both nonprofit and for-profit. So Kevin, we are delighted to have you today. And there's also the eMarketing Association. So how can we forget that? So Kevin, who is Didit and who is the eMarketing Association?
So Didit started in the SaaS business. We had an SEO SaaS platform in 96, and then we got really early into paid search. We built a bid alert system for the first pay-per-click search engine called GoTo.com. That went public as Overture, ended up becoming part of Yahoo in the interim. Google got into paid search, and we were automating that the entire time. So we built a bid management platform. That business ended up not being as great as we had hoped. It was great for about 10 years. And then Marin Software raised a ton of money, over 100 million in venture money, went public at a 420 million thereabouts valuation, but has never had a profitable quarter to my knowledge. And so as a result, that became sort of not a fun business. So we did 11 M&A deals to become a full service digital first agency. I'm still inventing tech for ourselves and for others. So that's the day job, is Didit, helping clients squeeze the most juice out of the marketing and sales channels that they've got, primarily marketing, primarily customer acquisition. The eMarketing Association I acquired as a result of a tragedy in the former owner's business family. And I had just been sort of really close with them. And so when they were unable to continue with the eMarketing Association, I sort of inherited it and didn't really want to be in the association business, but I use it for podcasts, much the same way that you do podcasts.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like you have much spare time.
Exactly.
Well, thank you for joining us for today. Kevin, we do have a tradition here at Pit Stops To Podium, and that's to get to know our guests outside of work. And so what are 3 fun facts our audience should know about you?
Well, there's I don't even remember what I wrote down, to be perfectly honest. I should have kept that document up there. But We Care, which you alluded to in the intro, that was a fun cause marketing platform, which was really the stimulus for my interest in cause marketing. It generated about 8 million for nonprofits using cause marketing powered e-commerce. And then our biggest partner, Amazon, was inspired, let's say, to launch Amazon Smile based on the data that they saw coming out of our platform. So for those of you who don't know about Amazon Smile, they've raised over 400 million for nonprofits at this point in time. Another fun fact is I grew up in Massapequa, which is a small town, but has an inordinately large number of famous people, from Jerry Seinfeld to the Stray Cats to the Baldwin brothers, and went to school with their sister. And their dad was a teacher in my high school. So there was that's sort of the interesting fact. So you'll have to remind me what the third one was. I don't even remember what I put down there.
Well, you have, I have. It's interesting. I never really understood the smile component of Amazon. So now I know, because I always see it. I mean, I have a wife and 3 kids, and I have a box in front of my door every day, and I always see the smile, and so now I know why it exists. So that's fun. It sounds like you started a nonprofit as well. So what's that about?
Yeah, absolutely. So Giving Forward was an inspiration as a result of cause marketing powered commerce. We saw how many millions that was able to generate for nonprofits that they wouldn't have had otherwise. So the Amazon Smile logo actually existed before the Amazon Smile Foundation and the Amazon Smile platform. They just aptly named it that way. And so in addition to cause marketing powered commerce, I said, let's think about all the other ways we can take marketing dollars, end up putting those marketing dollars into the coffers of nonprofits in a way that creates a win-win scenario for the business, for the consumer, and for the nonprofit. And that's really the three-way win. I wanted to build platforms that would facilitate that. So I decided to try, before even founding Giving Forward as a nonprofit, I was going to try to relaunch WeCare. And I wanted to do cause marketing powered content, and I wanted to buy a domain that already had traffic. And so of the 4 domains I tried to buy, the most famous is Gawker.com. So you may remember Gawker and the Hulk Hogan sex tapes and Peter Thiel funding the lawsuit that put Gawker out of business. So I tried to buy Gawker out of the bankruptcy to relaunch it as Gawker for good. And that was a really fun adventure. I ended up getting turned into the stalking horse bidder for that because they wanted to rerun the auction, sort of due to some inconsistencies in the way the initial bids came in. It was sort of crazy, but that's all been documented. You can Google my name and Gawker and see all the press I got out of that. But after failing to acquire 4 different domains to relaunch WeCare, I just decided to start Giving Forward. So we have goodbuzz.org, which is our content platform. We have a cause marketing powered events platform under goodbuzz.org as well, which, think of it like a ticket master, but the ticket buyer can choose a nonprofit when they buy the ticket and support that nonprofit. And then we built sweepsforacause.org, which is an Omaze clone essentially, but also lets the consumer pick different nonprofits when they enter for a chance to win. So building a lot of interesting tech, helping nonprofits in interesting ways.
Yeah, I love how you have a passion. Well, one, you have a passion, how you apply it, and both for the for-profit space and the nonprofit space. That's commendable. And let's transition into the big idea. And, in light of your experience, and we have a lot of folks on this call, or on the podcast, that desire to build from an entrepreneurship perspective. And I think you have an interesting take on that, which is it possible to be a parallel entrepreneur and not just a serial entrepreneur? And so before we kind of unpack that a little bit, like what led you to that idea, or why are you passionate about that topic?
Yeah, I think, not everyone is suited for parallel entrepreneurship, and probably investors don't like the idea of parallel entrepreneurship. They want singular focus, right? I happen to have bootstrapped my businesses and my nonprofits, and so I have the luxury of choosing to be a parallel entrepreneur. But, the common theme is problem solving, right? And sometimes you see a problem that can be solved, and if it requires its own separate organization or its own separate tech stack or whatever, in that case, parallel entrepreneurship can make sense. Also, there are sometimes situations where you can learn things while, solving one problem, which apply to the problems under another context, right? Because when you think about running an agency, you're constantly solving marketing problems for your clients, right? And sometimes you solve them with strategy. Sometimes you solve them with technology, and you either build things or integrate things together. And sometimes it's just implementation, right? And so as a result, when you can sort of take that same thing and apply it to separate silos, like Giving Forward and building tech and systems and platforms for nonprofits, it's a huge win, because especially when it overlaps into a common area like marketing, I think parallel entrepreneurship can make sense.
Yeah, it sounds like there's where there's a connection and there's almost this multiplier effect that you're describing. Well, let's talk a little bit. Let's unpack that a little bit further. You talked a little bit about problem solving, and let's start with this first anchor topic, which is around thinking like an inventor for clients and for your own business. And so, what does that mean to you as it relates to thinking like an inventor for your clients?
Yeah, I think it's almost like the marginal increases you can get in marketing efficiency through sort of the standard compound marketing idea of, okay, I need to improve every touch point, right? And those benefits compound. You can probably move strong double digits in growth off of those kinds of things. But sometimes there's a separate big idea that needs to be layered into that. And the big idea could be a big idea strategy or big idea technology. And that's where, inventing comes in, right? Because at that point, sometimes inventing is just stitching things together that already exist, right, in a new way. It's been a lot easier to invent from a technology perspective in the last 5 years, because now everything's API driven. So you can glue things together, which were never really meant to be glued together. And sometimes you have to build things, from scratch. So if you bring an inventor's mindset to the problem, as opposed to just a pure operational efficiency mindset, your home runs are bigger, right? Because from a pure ops optimization perspective and optimizing each of the touch points, you can end up with 20, 30, 40% efficiency gains, maybe even more, because every touch point from the initial media that you bought or the earned media hit that you got or the influencer opportunity that you had, and then you do the landing page optimization. Then you do the conversion rate optimization for AOV. Then you do the lifetime value optimization, right? All those things are great independently, and they're even more powerful when they're stacked up against each other. But sometimes you need the big idea and the invention, right? And so that big idea and that invention is a sort of, wow, like I didn't even think about doing that at all, right? And that when you have your big idea and you have your invention, there's probably a 90% chance that it's a bad idea, and that's the reason nobody's done it before, right? Mm-hmm. And so at that point, you have to sort of become your own devil's advocate and say, look, wait a minute, why doesn't this exist? Like, it seemed like a no-brainer when it flew into my brain, and now I have to sort of deconstruct that and figure out if it's a good idea or not. And then you have to determine your risk tolerance, right? Do you want to invest in building this idea or stitching these things together or doing this particular partnership? Sometimes it's just a partnership idea, right? But if you think like an inventor and you think about rising everybody's boats higher with a rising tide, sometimes you can come up with some really fun ideas.
Yeah, I think it's, the challenge, it seems, that the inventor mindset, we have a value called 100% stewardship. And it's that same idea of like, let's think like an owner. How can we help these companies? But there's a challenge too, right? The inventors, especially the early stages, I think there's a bias towards that concept. But as you grow and as you scale, to your point about risk, it becomes harder and harder to maintain that, where you almost get to this like analysis paralysis. So let's talk a little bit about like as you mature, like the temptation or the risk that you have with that inventor. It gets into like the stoicism within business. So how have you dealt with that, and what should our audience be mindful of? How do you resist that kind of mentality or mindset?
Yeah, I happen to be a bit of a natural stoic. Interestingly, I learned more about stoicism quite serendipitously because as I was trying to buy Gawker out of the bankruptcy, Ryan Holiday released a book called Conspiracy, which was about the story of Peter Thiel funding the lawsuit against Gawker surreptitiously behind the scenes and how it leaked out. And I had read Ryan Holiday's earlier book, Trust Me, I'm Lying, but I didn't realize he was like a staunch stoic, like he's all about stoicism. And I happened to look on Amazon and I was like, oh, look, there's another interesting book, The Obstacle is the Way. And I read the little, blurb on that. I'm like, wow, that is my life, right? Because all the stupid, crazy stuff that gets thrown in front of you, whether it's Amazon being inspired to take your idea and run with it, leaving you minus 43% of your revenue, or it's, other things I've had to go through, Marin Software deciding that they were going to go into the same business as you and having the margin erosion within that category. Those are like pretty major, potentially business killing situations. And in the case of WeCare, it actually killed the business. But luckily, it wasn't my only gig, right? So, but getting back up and being a stoic and taking another run at it, or taking a run at it from a different direction. The obstacle is sometimes the way, right? And that's probably my favorite of Ryan Holiday's books, but he's got like 6 or 7 stoicism books. And I think that they're really applicable to life and to business if you're sort of into that mindset.
Yeah, we had in a previous guest, we had Rob Foreman, one of the co-founders of SalesLoft, and they recently, Vista Equity, put a significant investment valued at over $1 billion, so it's in that unicorn status. And the early stages, they had a product that was their bell cow, and then LinkedIn came and said, you need to stop selling that product. And it's that whole idea, like you're back against the wall, and what do you do with it? How do you respond to it? And sometimes that's where, like from an inventor perspective, you're forced into that mindset, and actually that's where the creativity happens, and that's the SalesLoft narrative. That happened to them. They pivoted, and they make a product, and now they're valued over $1 billion. So completely agree with that sentiment. So one of the things you had mentioned, Kevin, in the first, we talked a little bit about the inventor mindset. We talked a little bit about stoicism in business, but you talked a little bit about rising tide. Let's park on that a little bit. The whole concept of rising tide lifts all boats. And so what is that? How does that, apply to what you're talking about within this parallel entrepreneur concept?
It really applies within all of these constructs, right? So if you sort of think about it from my main day job, Didit, which probably is 65 hours of my week, right? In order to, have a long-term relationship with a client, right? We need to have a fair relationship, right? And that means that we're both winning, right? Because if we're not both winning, you're going to get fired as the agency. Now, obviously, there are political dynamics often in the agency business where somebody comes on and takes over client side and they have a posse that they want to bring in because they worked with them before. And so it's unavoidable to have certain churn. But, as long as the team's focus is on this idea of like, let's try to figure out how to win together, I think that works really well. We can even deploy that into relationships when we do, whether it's influencer marketing or media buying, right? Prices need to be fair for media that you buy, or influencer marketing agreements need to be fair to everybody. And sometimes when we come up with fun ways to work with influencers, for example, we'll try to think about like, what is it beyond money that would be really beneficial to this influencer, right? And you might think, well, no, but like they all got their hands out or their hats out, right? They're looking for money. Well, a lot of them that are earlier in their stages of being influencers, they're looking for increased reach, right? So if there are interesting ways that you construct relationships with these folks, it's again a rising tide argument, right? Let's try to make everybody win from this perspective. In cause marketing under Giving Forward, right? The whole context of cause marketing is you're creating a win-win scenario between a business and a nonprofit and the consumer. So it could be, as people go through sweepsforacause.org, in the next iteration, we're going to add the ability for businesses to say, oh, if you donate $20 to one of these curated nonprofit, we'll give you a $20 off certificate for, orders over $100 or more, right? So now the person thinks like, oh, it's sort of like I was thinking of buying that anyway. Now basically the donation is free, right? And again, you can change the percentages and make the $10 donation gets $20 gift voucher, right? You can do all sorts of fun things and play with it. But the common theme is this idea like, let's construct a win-win scenario so that everybody's happier. And that's a rising tide situation. I mean, my podcast's on the eMarketing Association. They benefit both the guest and myself, right? So it's a common theme that runs through my life.
Well, yeah, it's one of those kind of sales philosophies. I mean, for like the good sales reps, when budget comes up, it's yes, there's a price, but what's the motivator? And so what is causing, like what's driving the urgency, what's driving the need, so it's not just a pricing conversation. And I mean, the same principle applies in the marketing. When you even mentioned the influencer, yes, there's a desire to their coin operate just like most people, but there might be underlying motivators that you also need to be aware of. So I think that context is really helpful for you to create the right program structure, to your point, where everyone wins. Well, Kevin, I'm sure that a lot of our audience could benefit and win from your approach and methodology as it relates to marketing. And speaking of, being beneficial for both sides. So what are ways in which our audience can engage with you and these different, ventures that you're part of if they want to learn more?
Sure. Well, it's always easy to reach me on LinkedIn. You can search for Kevin Lee. There's a lot of Kevin Lees, but if you search for Kevin Lee and Didit, I'll definitely show up at the top. You can also email me, kevin@didit.com, if you'd like to reach me that way. And happy to brainstorm. It's always fun. Business strategy is super fun. Love doing it.
It's funny you mentioned that. We've had a different Kevin Lee already on this podcast. So do not reach out to the Kevin Lee from Cobaton. Reach out to the Kevin Lee from Didit.
Actually, reach out to both of us because I'm sure he's a great Kevin Lee too.
Yeah, so. He is. Yeah, I shouldn't throw shade on Kevin just on this specific episode. Well, Kevin, thank you so much for joining, learning a little bit more about your background, but ultimately how you think about this parallel entrepreneurship concept. It was great, really insightful for me, and I'm sure for the rest of our audience. So thanks again, and we really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me, Brendan.